And there are tensions flaring between two ASEAN members. Myanmar has expelled Timor-Leste's representative, ordering the charge d'affaires to leave the country within 7 days. And this is after a rights group said that Dili had opened a legal case against the Myanmar military for war crimes. The Timorese president earlier cited legal proceedings initiated in Dili, and it's said to be a landmark move against a fellow ASEAN member. Well, Myanmar called it a great disappointment to learn that the Timorese government has accepted the case submitted by the Chin Human Rights Organization, or CHRO. The organization says that Dili has appointed a senior prosecutor. CHRO, based in Chin State, and mainly represents the ethnic minority there. It says the legal proceedings are against Myanmar leader Min Aung Hlaing and his military government. And the organization claims to have irrefutable evidence, including of gang rape. The legal basis is universal jurisdiction, which allows domestic courts to try international offences. Myanmar is already fighting Rohingya genocide allegations at the International Court of Justice. Timor-Leste joined ASEAN only in October, and tensions sparked soon after in January. That's when the Timorese president, José Ramos Horta, met the CHRO in Dili. That prompted Myanmar to summon the charge d'affaires and issue a statement saying that the meeting violated the ASEAN principle of non-interference. Myanmar said it also sought formal clarification from Timor-Leste when both representatives met on the sidelines of the ASEAN foreign ministers' retreat in Cebu. Well, for more, we are joined by Susannah Patton, who's Deputy Research Director and Program Director for Southeast Asia at Lowy Institute. It's good to see you, Susannah. Can you give us your thoughts on the factors that may have driven Timor-Leste to move at this point? Tell us about the factors that Dili could have been weighing in opening such a case now.
We know that Timor-Leste is a country that has been very focused on democracy internationally, is more supportive of international intervention and the role of the United Nations given its history and the fact that it owes its existence in part to a UN peacekeeping mission. And ever since the military coup in Myanmar, Timor-Leste has been much more well-disposed towards working with the opposition in Myanmar. And that is something which has annoyed Myanmar in the past. And we've seen previously an expulsion of a diplomat in 2023. So this is very much a development, I think, that is in line with both Timor-Leste's focus on democracy, its concern about the situation in Myanmar, and it's certainly something that is very interesting in light of Timor-Leste's accession to ASEAN late last year, because immediately prior to its accession, Timor-Leste had been a bit quieter about the situation in Myanmar, perhaps because of the risk that Myanmar was going to block Timor-Leste's membership of the group. We know that Myanmar was not supportive of that, probably for these very reasons. But perhaps now that it's in, Timor-Leste's leadership feel that they have a bit more latitude to pursue this kind of accountability mechanism for crimes committed by the Myanmar junta.
Okay, let's talk about how this move might affect Timor-Leste's positioning then as ASEAN's newest member. And I've got a part two to this question. How does this step also sit in within ASEAN's long-standing principle of non-interference?
Well, it's very interesting, and I think in some ways this is, quite unusual for an ASEAN member to be taking this kind of legal process against another member. Certainly, human rights advocates and supporters of minorities in Myanmar who have been persecuted by the Myanmar military have been looking for countries around the world to try and take this kind of action using universal jurisdiction. But so far, no other ASEAN member has taken this kind of action. So I think, to me, it signals that Timor-Leste is not going to give up on some of the principles that make it quite unique among ASEAN member countries. It signals that it's going to continue to pursue the issues that it thinks are important. And I think that will play out in the ASEAN processes. Exactly how is hard to say, because more broadly there is a disagreement among ASEAN members about how to engage with Myanmar, especially following the sham elections in Myanmar. There's a divergence of views within the ASEAN members about whether or not relations with Myanmar should be normalised. And I think certainly Timor-Leste is now going to represent one extreme end of that spectrum, which would still very much push for accountability and for action against the Myanmar military.
Yeah, you talk about the stalemate, you talk about the disagreements in the past within ASEAN. Could this move then be the game changer, you feel, Susannah?
I don't think that this is really going to fundamentally shift the other ASEAN countries' approach to Myanmar. I think for the other countries, for the most part, it does vary a bit, but I think they do still worry about the idea of interference in their own domestic affairs, and some countries would be concerned that this could set a kind of precedent, because although I think it's fair to say it's hard to see how this could lead to any kind of enforcement action, there is definitely a political symbolism to one ASEAN member taking this kind of action to investigate another. And so that's something that clearly the less democratic members of ASEAN won't be welcoming. I think other than that, it's probably more down to the approaches that the bigger ASEAN members take, whether that be Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines as ASEAN chair, that will really determine how the group, as a cohesive entity, will navigate relations with Myanmar.
But how well equipped then is ASEAN to manage a possible dispute between its own members should it escalate? How could this episode also impact ASEAN's credibility and future enlargement?
I'm not sure that this will really escalate. It's Myanmar and Timor-Leste don't need to have a great deal to do with each other than, in the course of their ASEAN membership. This isn't going to be a situation like we have between Thailand and Cambodia. Certainly you wouldn't want to see a situation where things disintegrate to the point that meetings are getting jammed up with complaints between the two parties. That's not something that any of the other countries want to see. But ultimately, I think in particular for Timor-Leste, it will be mindful that it's a new member of this organisation and wants that to be a success and wants ASEAN to be a success. And so I think there will be kind of a natural limitation to how far this dispute can escalate. No doubt, though, it does send a signal that that ASEAN, I think, is something that is well known by anyone who observes ASEAN, that there is a huge divergence on many issues between the members, and this is just going to be another example of that.
Susannah, thank you for your thoughts and for speaking with us this Chinese New Year Eve. Susannah Patton is Deputy Research Director and Program Director for Southeast Asia at the Lowy Institute.